because the bishops commended it. These prayers were not authorized, and they were only commended. And the only way you can commend things is to offer a pastoral provision, which you could do anyway, and it's just slightly formalized. And so people seem to forget that and say, well, we can bless same-sex. You cannot. And if in the Church of England somewhere you see these prayers of love and faith being used in a way which looks like a quasi-marriage, then I'm afraid that is not legal, and it cannot be done.
Rev Dr Ian Paul, real privilege to welcome you again. Thank you so much for sparing some of your valuable time to talk to us. I was wondering whether, in fact, this might be the last time we would talk about living in love and faith as a concept. It might be the last time we talk about the program, but not about the concept. Perhaps you could tell us what happened at the last synod. I think it was, 9th to the 13th of February?
Yes, it was. Well, we actually managed to devote another 5 whole hours of debate to this, Tony. So if you imagine sitting in a chamber for 5 hours listening to loads of speeches and maybe standing up yourself and trying to do something, it's quite an ordeal. In theory, the debate was about drawing a line under the LLF process, which has been going on since 2017, when Justin Welby uttered the fateful words, "We need to seek a radical new Christian inclusion rooted in scripture and Christian theology," although most people forgot that last phrase. And that was unnecessary. It was a mistake. I said to Justin, why did you say that? He said, I had to say something. I said, no, you didn't. You could have just stopped and gone away and thought about it. We would have been saved 9 years of agony and agonizing, money wasting debate, which I think hasn't really got us anywhere.
I mean, congregations have gone down, and arguably that's one of the reasons.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in terms of clergy morale and the drop in vocations, that's been a consistent, it's not the only feature, but a consistent one. What we had was following, which we talked about before, I think, following October, where the House of Bishops did say something quite different. And they said, actually, well, it was interpreted as putting the brakes on, I think, by external commentators. They've had a follow-up meeting in December, and then they brought a statement into this synod. And the statement had 4 elements. The first was to say that, as usual, an apology for the hurt caused to LGBTQI plus people, without really any explanation of what that accumulation of letters actually means, or even exploring what the apology was for, what has caused the harm. And I think the thing that came out very loudly in Synod, and in fact, even on the words of Stephen Cottrell, the Archbishop of York, he said, we over-promised and under-delivered. Because in 2023, when they brought the LLF process, the prayers of love and faith, Stephen went on Radio 4 and said, we now believe that any permanent, stable, faithful relationship is fine. It doesn't matter what the sex of the two parties are. But he had no right to say that, of course. He knew it was illegal. He knew it was contrary to doctrine. And so he did. He and other bishops set up this expectation that there was going to be radical change on the horizon. For Orthodox Anglicans, that was very disturbing. For those wanting to see a change in the doctrine of the Church, whether gay people or their allies for change, that was hugely disappointing that it didn't happen. Though, of course, one of the things that came out in the debate is that gay people, LGBT people have a range of views. And the debate, actually, many of the speakers were gay men and women who said, we accept the doctrine of the Church, the teaching of Jesus. We think that's right, and we should stay with it. So it certainly isn't a question of gay against straight or pro-gay against anti-gay at all. It's about differences of view about the doctrine of the Church and what the teaching of Jesus is.
And so, and of course, for anybody who maybe doesn't realise, what we were talking about, Living in Love and Faith, was all about whether and how the Church recognises same-sex unions and same-sex marriage within the Church, and to what extent or otherwise it blesses them. And ongoing. And so Living in Love and Faith as a process has gone.
Well, it's interesting because then clause B of the motion said, there'll be a formal end. The last report will be in July. I don't think anyone thinks it's going to be significant at all. And this is the formal end of the process. But the motion came from a House of Bishops which is divided. And clause D at the end said, but we're going to establish another working group which is going to report back probably in 2028. So on the one hand, the door was closed. On the other hand, it was just left a little bit open for some people to kind of put their foot in the door.
So it's almost like, oh, great, that's done. But what are those? In fact, there's 2 working groups, aren't there? What are those 2 Trojan horses we see coming towards us in the distance? I think maybe they've realised that it's impossible doing it this kind of the way that avoids addressing the canons, etc.
Yeah.
And so they've had to stop that. The canons, of course, are the Church of England law, for anybody who doesn't know, which are the laws of the land, in fact.
Yes, they are, because we're the church established by law.
That's right. That says this is what the definition of marriage in the church is.
Yeah, it is. And so as a nation, we have two different contradictory definitions of marriage in law. And, whether you're part of the Church of England or not, that depends on which applies to you. But I mean, some people said to me, well, how could the House of Bishops said both things? How can they on the one hand say the process has ended, and on the other hand say there's an ongoing process? And some people have said, oh, this is like rebranding the bus, or when the railways change hands. The simple answer is this is not really coherent, in the sense that this is not a motion produced by one person or produced by a House of Bishops of one mind. What the contradictions and tensions in the motion reveal is the fact that the House of Bishops, although the weight of point of view has shifted, there are still in the House of Bishops people who believe that the doctrine of the Church needs to change. And so there's still this tension in the House, and that was made evident in the motion. And what it meant then was that in Synod itself, there were, from those who wanted to see change, there were two opposite reactions. So Charlie Batchick-Bell, who's a prominent campaigner on this, in Synod, he was in tears. He was lamenting the fact that the bishops had betrayed him, and not only betrayed him, but betrayed all gay people in the UK, ignoring the fact that not all gay people agree with him. Then, bizarrely, on Radio 4 the next morning, I was being interviewed with him by Justin Webb. And his view then was, oh, no, it's fine, it was a victory, and it's full steam ahead, and the direction of travel is clear. And I just said to him, I said, well, hang on a minute, yesterday you were saying the opposite. He said, well, they've got this working group. And it was quite amusing, because even Justin Webb, who was interviewing us, he waded in and said, oh, come on, Charlie, you know as well as I do what that means. It means nothing's going to happen. He said, we get people on all the time on Radio 4 saying, well, we're going to set up a working group. We know that means that it's kicked into the long grass. Nothing's going to happen. But the formal issue is the fact that since October, since the publication finally of the legal and the theological advice the House of Bishops has been given, it's now become clear exactly what the constraints are. And certainly if I was somebody looking for change in the church, that would have been the end for me, because it's very clear that change in doctrine is well nigh impossible unless you've got an overwhelming majority of liberals in the Synod, which is unlikely to happen, and that this is the position we're going to stay in. But of course, that's exactly what the House of Bishops said in 2017. So we haven't moved on at all.
Yep. So you've got these two groups, newly established groups. One is to look at that change of the doctrine, which you're rightly saying, and you of course are one of the most impactful Orthodox voices in this area at the moment. You've stood there and argued for orthodoxy all the way through this process. That's great. But one of the two new groups set up, one is to look at, well, can we change the doctrine? And you've said that's unlikely because it requires a 2/3 majority throughout the synod. That's all three areas of the synod, and that's very unlikely. The other group is to look at, well, even if you don't change the doctrine, what can we do anyway? Which is all the way back to LLF.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is,
and of course, the other question is, can clergy be permitted to enter same-sex marriage, or can we ordain people who are in a same-sex marriage? But the relatively simple logic is, the Canon B30 tells us the doctrine of marriage. Canon A5 tells us where that doctrine comes from, which is the ordinal, the BCP, and rooted in Scripture. And Canon C26 about the conduct of clergy says that clergy in their lifestyle must be a wholesome example, which in Church of England terms means living out and upholding the doctrine of the Church. So there's no, whatever you try and, however you try and, thread your camel through an eye of a needle, it's difficult to see there's any way of changing that and relaxing it. And again, the bishops one or two bishops have come out publicly and said they want to see change. And all they're going to be doing is A, raising expectations and disappointing those who want change on the one hand, and B, unsettling Orthodox Anglicans in their own diocese. So it's just, again, a fruitless exercise as far as I can see.
And I think your one of your recent, I suppose by the time this goes out, it'll be one of your recent blogs has honestly and fairly engaged with the biblical debate and said, look, what is the biblical case that people are making for supporting same-sex unions, same-sex marriage. And I'd recommend people go and read your blog, and we'll post the link to it.
Yeah. Well, it was very interesting. I had a very interesting exchange with Tim Good, who's one of the canons, residentiary canons at York Minster. And Tim and I, we overlapped on Archbishops Council. We've always got on well. He's a very personable chap, but he does think that he wants to see a change in doctrine of the church. His argument is that the male-female, it's a number of different points where we've explored and we exchanged about this together, and I've written it up on the blog. He says that on the one hand, the Genesis account is about the end of existential aloneness, and your loneliness can be ended for a man by another man, not just by another woman. He says that there's a theme of justice. What God is interested in relationships is covenant faithfulness. And he says that Jesus was an inclusive and a welcoming person. But interestingly, in the exchange, my challenge to him was, well, hang on a minute. Why do you, in the Genesis account, why do you extract the male-femaleness of the relationship when all the grammar and all the structure and all the context says this is what matters? And the reason is that when God says in Genesis 2:18, it's not good that the man should be alone, he isn't talking about existential loneliness. After all, the man, the Adam, is in fellowship with God and with the animals. The it's not good refers back to the creation principle in Genesis 1, where God makes humanity male and female, that they should be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth. That's the good that God is looking for. And a man cannot do that on his own. He needs an equal and opposite in the form of a woman for that. Interestingly, yes, Jesus was radically inclusive, but of course he included everybody in his call to repent. It's strange. I find it strange when people say, look at Jesus, he hung around with sinners. Yes, he hung around with sinners, Luke 5:32 says, and called them sick. I've come as a doctor to heal the sick. The people around me here, they are sick. They're sinners. They need to repent. As you and I do. This is how Jesus comes to us. He's our great physician. He doesn't come to us to say, I love you and I affirm you as you are and there's no change needed. Yeah. And of course, Jesus as a first century Jew sits exactly in Jewish ethics, which became the ethics of the early church. We see it reflected in Paul's letters, which is that quite counterculturally, Jesus and all his followers believed that marriage was between one man and one woman. And that was as countercultural in his day, in first century Greco-Roman context, as it is countercultural in our day. And there's not a shred of evidence that Jesus changed or challenged that teaching. And he goes back in Matthew 19 to affirm the creation of humanity, male and female, and that being the basis of marriage. If there was any hint at all that Jesus contradicted this uniform, significant universal Jewish ethic, then there'd be evidence of it, and there is none whatsoever. And it's striking that Jesus the inclusive still held to that biblical teaching on marriage.
Yeah, and I would recommend anyone to go and read that blog, because it's a very good example of essentially, when you pick it apart openly and honestly and objectively, it comes down to, but I feel different.
Yeah, and what was good about it, though, is that, and one person commented that Tim and I were able to have a respectful engagement across different positions without getting cross and without bad-mouthing each other and actually exploring the issues. And they said this is what we've lacked in these 9 years, because people have taken up the positions and there's been a sort of, fighting backwards and forwards. One thing I would say about the debate in Synod was that I was really encouraged by my colleagues who were speaking up for the current Anglican position on marriage. And I did feel as though the tone has changed for us. We're much less defensive, more generous, more empathetic. The tone was very positive, but it was also very clear. And I think that was significant for me.
Yeah. But we're still left with blessings of same-sex unions in the church, are we not?
No, we're left with prayers that have been commended not to bless a relationship, but to bless individuals, and only to be used in such a way as is not indicative of a departure of the doctrine of the marriage in the church, which is that marriage and sexual intimacy is to be only between one man and one woman in a marriage relationship, which is exclusive and lifelong. That's what was voted for in Synod. That's what because the bishops commended it. These prayers were not authorized, and they were only commended, and the only way you can commend things is to offer a pastoral provision which you could do anyway, and it's just slightly formalised. And so people seem to forget that and say, well, we can bless same-sex. You cannot. And if in the Church of England somewhere you see these prayers of love and faith being used in a way which looks like a quasi-marriage, then I'm afraid that is not legal. And it cannot be done.
But you get a couple up at the front during a service, so it's not a standalone service, and you pray over them and you ask the Lord to thank the Lord for them, and
you do, and you can do that with any two people you like, as long as it's not indicative of any departure from the doctrine of marriage, which all clergy and all bishops have taken solemn vows in public to uphold. So as I having conversations with various people, including bishops, and say, how can you tell me that you don't believe the doctrine of the church on marriage when that's what you said you would do? Bishops particularly have a role to uphold that and to, quote unquote, from the ordinal, drive away error. Error means people who don't believe the doctrine of the church according to the teaching of Jesus.
I know, but there's that old phrase of it: walks like a duck and quacks like a duck.
Well,
by any other measure,
if it quacks like an indication of a departure from the doctrine of marriage, then actually you need to call it out.
Yeah,
that's what we need to do.
What about, there was a Goddard amendment? What's all that about?
Well, that was a slightly unhappy moment. Liz Goddard had thought she'd agreed with Helen King an amendment to the motion which said that we've learnt lots from these Leicester groups who are meeting across differences and conversation. We'd like to carry that learning forward. I think Helen King got cold feet. I think some of her allies on the revisionist side said, hey, we can't have this, and we can't have you agreeing with an Orthodox person. So bizarrely, Helen King stood up and said, I withdraw this, I don't agree with it. And so, of course, the amendment fell, which was a shame, because I think for me it indicated that there are still people in Synod who would rather continue to drive at every possible opportunity to see change in the doctrine of marriage, and that's more important to them than actually agreeing with others or having good quality conversation. I think it's a shame.
Yeah, and then of course summer's coming, the July Synod. There are lots of elections between now and then.
No, the elections happen after. So July is the last synod of the existing quinquennium, right? And then we have the elections, and then we have a new synod meeting in November.
Fine, yeah. So, is there a message for more Orthodox people like yourself to get involved and get elected?
Get involved. Get involved. If you're a layperson, get involved in your deanery synod. Stand for General Synod. If you're clergy, stand. The electoral college there is just the clergy in the diocese.
Yeah.
In theory, everyone will be saying, "Oh, this is all about LLF again." Actually, the main thing is to say nothing is going to change. The doctrine of marriage is not changing. Please, can we draw a proper line? Can we focus on more important issues about how we see God renew his church, how we see more people come to living faith in Jesus, and therefore to see our churches growing and flourishing as communities of faith, which are blessing their communities. That needs to be the focus. That needs to be the most important thing on our agenda.
Nothing else to be said. Reverend Dr. Ian Paul, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome, Tony. Nice to be with you.